This chapter will attempt to open your eyes on the sonic possibilities user multisamples provide. To use custom samples, select the slot, the cell, and the user samples bank you want. Then double-click on the multisample you want to load. If your multisample contains percussive sounds mapped over the keyboard, you can use them in a drum mode phrase and choose individual samples to be triggered on each cell. You can load up to 16 multisamples per slot, and user multisamples appear here. Once a multisample is loaded into a slot, it remains in the list and can be accessed later on in any other cell. To load other multisamples within the user sample bank, select an empty entry and double-click on the multisample in the browser list. If you need to remove a loaded multisample to make place for another, select the multisample you want to replace and load a new one in its place, or choose the Unload Selected item at the bottom of the list. Since there are 16 multisamples per patch and up to 4 patches in a combi, you can load a total of 64 multisamples per combi. User multisamples can be assigned to any cell as would any factory-based multisamples. Up until now, we've assumed that you had user multisamples in the browser, but in order to use multisamples in the browser or in a patch, you need to import audio files into Xphraze. Xphraze is not a sampler, so you can't record samples from within the interface, nor can you edit them inside Xphraze. In other words, you will need an audio editing application of your choice to prepare files and save them in WAV or AIFF format. Click on the Advanced button to access Xphraze's multisample mapper functions. To insert one or more new samples, you need to begin by selecting the user sample bank of your choice and an empty multisample from that bank's list. For example, user samples A will be available for patches in slot A, user samples B will be available for patches in slot B, and so on. Once you've saved the multisamples, you'll be able to load them anywhere you want from the Multisample Browser tab, as we have discussed earlier in this chapter. Now that the empty multisample space is selected, right-click on PC or Control-click on Mac inside the empty multisample display and select Insert Audio, or press the Insert key on your keyboard. Browse through your computer for the samples. You can monitor samples while browsing by checking the Auto Play option. Selected files will play automatically. Once selected, click the Open button and the file will be assigned in the multisample across the entire keyboard range. You can select more than one sample at a time and distribute the samples across the keyboard range in the multisample mapper. Selecting a sample within the multisample will reveal the range covered by the sample in a green overlay, while the unity or root note is identified by an orange color. By default, Xphraze will stretch out the sample to cover the entire key range, which means that the sample assigned to the highest range will always extend to the highest note on the keyboard, while the lowest sample will always extend to the lowest note on the keyboard. You can change the order of samples within the multisample by dragging its representation up or down. To modify the range a sample covers, click on the edge of the multisample to select it and then drag the upper or lower portion of the sample. When you want to map more than 2 or 3 samples across the keyboard, it's easier to start by mapping the low range samples, moving your way up, or starting at the top and moving your way down. To delete a sample, right-click on PC or Control-click on Mac and choose Delete, or just select the sample and press Delete on your keyboard. Unlike typical samplers, the range covered by the deleted sample will be taken over by an existing sample, moving its current range to compensate. If you prefer replacing the current sample with another one instead, use the Replace function through the Multisample Mapper context menu. Xphraze will open a dialog box to let you choose a replacement sample. When changing the range or mapping within a multisample, the unity note gets shifted around as well. You can reposition the unity note by clicking on the appropriate key in the keyboard layout. Xphraze displays the name of the sample and the upper range note number on the right. Once you are happy with the layout of your multisample, rename it by right-clicking on the PC or control-clicking on Mac in the mapper area and select the Rename Multisample option. Multisamples that have not been saved display an asterisk in the upper right portion of their name. Going back to the main interface, you can see that the new multisample appears in the list of user samples available for this slot. To save the multisample in order to make it available in other slots, as we discussed earlier on in this chapter, right-click on a PC or control-click on a Mac in the mapper display and choose Save or Save All Multisamples. The Unload Multisample option deletes the current multisample from memory. Use this option when you want to free up unused multisamples from memory or start reorganizing this multisample. Remember that when the Save Samples with Patches option is selected, user multisamples will be saved with the patch when you save it, making this patch available on other workstations. Once a multisample is saved, its name will appear in the multisample page of the Xphraze browser and will be available to load in any cell. Once inside a cell, you can apply all the processing included in Xphraze and use it to create more Xphraze textures, leads, synths, rhythms, effects, and so on.